Okay, guys. When we last left Frankie Fish in the Sonic suitcase, it was a pretty intense moment. Frankie and his granddad were about to head back to 2017, and granddad was having a few second thoughts. So it was getting a little bit intense. They were in the toilet and they were about to go. So let's have a look at what happens. What happens if things have changed at home? Asked a suddenly frail-looking Elfie Fish. Well, to be honest, I hope one thing hasn't changed, said Frankie. What's that? Asked Grandad. Frankie squirmed, suddenly feeling bashful. I hope we're friends in the future, like the way we are in the past, he said. Knock, knock, bang, bang. The angry Fredito had now turned his hand into a fist and was banging on the door. The toilet's walls were shuddering, but Grandad paid no attention. He seemed to be thinking about what Frankie had said, and then he gave Frankie a nod. There's only one way to find out, Grandad said. Frankie had not been so relieved since the time his mum told him she decided against baking him a Teletubbies themed cake for his birthday. Bang! Thump! Thump! What are you two scoundrels up to in there? The amazingly agitated Fredito seemed to be attempting to break the door down with his shoulder. Let's go, Grandad, said Frankie, and put one hand on the man's shoulder. Then they both grabbed the handle as Grandad muttered, Good luck, everybody. Happy travels. Frankie pressed enter. At that exact moment, the toilet door fell off its hinges. In fell a really angry Fredito. Now there's going to be trouble, he said, as he picked himself up from the stinky toilet floor. But as the astonished Fredito looked up, he couldn't believe his eyes, because the scoundrels had vanished, disappeared in a way he could only dream of doing. What in the name of... he said, completely exasperated. Clarissa joined him at the doorway. Maybe you learnt that trick, she said. They would book you in New York. So that's the end of that chapter. I'm going to keep reading. Chapter 25 is Home. Dust, wood shavings, and pollen. Those were the things Frankie could smell when he woke in his granddad's shed. Frankie turned to see Grandad, who was sitting up and rubbing his eyes. They both looked at each other wordlessly, and then got up and headed straight out of the shed. Straight away, Frankie noticed that Nana's forget-me-nots and rose bushes were back where they should be. That was a good sign, but Frankie knew that it didn't definitely mean that Nana was back. Maybe his granddad had ended up marrying someone else, who happened to like flowers. There was only one way to know for sure. Heart pounding, Frankie walked with his granddad up to the back door of the fish house. Grandad put his hand on the doorknob and paused. Whatever happens, Frankie, may I say, I've enjoyed spending time with you, he said quietly, even if we did risk the future of human civilization. Me too, Frankie said, with a small, nervous smile. They both took a deep, big breath as Grandad opened the back door. Blueberry pancakes and freshly shampooed carpets. That was what Frankie could smell as he stepped inside. A smile crept across his face as he and Grandad walked into the kitchen, where they were met with the best sight either of them had ever seen in their entire lives. Nana Fish, nee Nurse Mavis Hopeley, standing at the kitchen sink, dunking a tea bag into a cup of hot water. Honey, we're home! Exclaimed Grandad. Nana Fish turned and with a puzzled smile said, Of course I am, you old fool. Where else would I be? Grandad gave a big toothy grin, followed by a big smooch. Gave her a big toothy grin, followed by a big smooch right on the lips. Frankie was so relieved he didn't even gag. He raced out through the house, checking that the bed in his grandparents' room was actually a double bed, that there were flowers and vases in every room, and no dirt on the floor. Even the brown drapes had gone back to Nana's pretty polka-dotted curtains. He stood in the lounge looking around as Family Feud played on TV. Name something that cannot be changed, the host was saying, unaware of how ironic that question was in this particular house. Everything was exactly the same, Frankie realised, relief rushing through him. Then in the living room, he saw one thing that was different. On the wall, above the couch, the paintings of dogs playing poker was gone. A new painting hung in its place. It was a portrait of a young Alfie Fish, moments before the big race. Alfie was depicted leaning against his number 42 race car, talking to an old man and a boy. "Well, I'll be damned," said Alfie in amazement, wandering into the room with his arm around Nana Fish's shoulder. "It's a wonderful painting, isn't it, Nana? I still get goosebumps when I look at it. I've often wondered who that man and young boy are, but I guess we'll never know." Frankie and Grandad exchanged a grin. "Who painted it, Nana?" said Frankie. "Why, your great Uncle Roddy, of course," said Nana. "He always says that the day of the big race was when he decided to become a professional artist." She glanced at the clock. "Speaking of Roddy, he should be here in an hour or so." "Roddy's coming here?" asked Grandad, jaw dropping wide. "Of course, you silly fool. You know he always comes here when he's visiting from Paris," said Nana, swatting him fondly. "And I dare say the two of you will sit around all day, talking about the old days in Glasgow, like you usually do." Frankie suddenly felt very warm, and the final little knot of tension in his belly melted away. The doorbell rang. "Roddy's plane must have landed early," Nana exclaimed as she bustled off to answer it. Frankie was feeling so good that at first he hadn't even noticed who'd entered the living room. It was only when he felt a hand ruffling his hair that he looked around to see his mum beaming at him. That's his mum, Grandad and Nana Fish, and young Frankie. Behind her was Frankie's dad in St. Lou, looking thrilled to see him. "Francis, mate," said his dad. "You've grown." Grandad smiled, and Frankie felt his grin grow wider and wider. He gave his mum, his dad, and even St. Lou, yes, that's how happy he was to be back, the biggest hugs of their lives. Tina Fish took her son's face in her hands and examined every inch of it. His smile dipped just a little. "Your face," she remarked. Frankie felt the knot quickly reappear. "What about my face?" he said, voice quivering slightly. "You look older somehow," she said. Then she smiled and gave her son a big squeeze. "Maybe a little more responsible too." "Well, I guess we all change eventually, given enough time," Frankie said, with a wink at his Grandad. And Grandad winked back. Alright guys, I'm going to leave it there for today. The next chapter is chapter 26. I believe it's maybe the last or second last chapter. So it's called chapter 26, An Offer Not Even Drew Bird Could Resist.